Welcome to this four-part series introducing author Stella Harvey and her work to date. The first part will give us a bit of a background into what motivates Stella's writing and some of the advice she gives other writers that she mentors in the SFU writing studio. Stella Leventoyannis Harvey is a fiction writer whose short stories have appeared in the Literary Leanings Anthology, the New Orphic Review, Emerge Magazine, and the Dalhousie Review. Her nonfiction has appeared in Peak News Magazine, The Question, and the Globe and Mail. Signature Editions published her first novel, Nicolai's Daughters, in 2012, and Psychogios Publications of Athens published the Greek translation in 2014. Signature Editions published The Brink of Freedom in 2015. Finding Calidora is Stella's third novel. Stella was born in Cairo, Egypt, and moved with her family to Calgary as a child. These days, she makes her home in Whistler, BC. Stella founded the Whistler Writing Society, which each year produces the Whistler Writers Festival and other literary programming under her direction. She also mentors students in the Writers Studio at Simon Fraser University. Stella, it's so nice to have you with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, thanks so much, Rebecca, for that great introduction. And maybe I could share my screen and show you a bit about my background. So here we go. Um, that's me, the knock-kneed child, and I still have those same knock knees, by the way. Some things never change. My background is I'm a social worker by training, and I still think that that's the thing I know how to do best. I spent 17 years in government and another 10 years in the private sector. And as you said, I moved to Canada with my family when I was 6 years old. I have lived abroad as well in Europe for 3 years working. And as you mentioned, I did start the Whistler Writing Society and founded a number of programs here with a whole lot of help from this community in Whistler. So that in a nutshell is who I am. And yes, that is my picture. Probably ages me.
That's great. Who would you say you are as a writer?
It's an interesting thing. I think for me, I feel, and then I try to figure things out like through my writing. So I might see a situation and wonder why that situation is the way it is, or why someone, which is more likely the way I look at the world, why is someone doing what they're doing, and where did they come from? What has caused this particular thing to happen, for them to be the way they are, etc. So I think everything for me starts with a question, which is why. I know that Stephen King talks about, for him, stories come from the question, what? What would happen if? But I think for me, and maybe this is my training and background, I'm not sure, but for me, I want to understand why someone does what they do. And really, a lot of my writing is character driven, trying to understand and figure out why somebody does what they do. Because I think also that translates to from the individual to the global. So those are the things that interest me.
Excellent. Can you give us an example of that why?
Well, maybe I can do that by telling you a little bit about my first novel, which is Nicolai's Daughters. This novel has three main characters, and it basically goes back and forth in time, about a 20-year time span, looking at a particular family and the impact of a trauma that happened generations ago, but the impact of it going forward. So to start with, if you'll allow, I have the trailer. So we'll start with that, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail.
¿Quieres que te hagamos una foto? Es que apenas que te muy bien se parece. Que te tiene por el
So as I mentioned before, it's a family that has long been marked by tragedy. And what is the impact of that tragedy going forward in subsequent generations? So it's a family saga, and it deals in particular with a tragedy that happened during World War II in a small village, mountain village actually, of Kalavrita. And the sacrifices a family made to survive the shame, to survive, and the shame, the secret shame that is allowed to fester. There was quite a lot of research that I did in terms of this particular project. I did go to Kalavrita. I visited the War Museum, listened to testimonials, and really that's where the impetus came for this project. Is in one particular testimonial, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I also walked up the hill where the massacres occurred. So basically, what had happened in Kalavrita is the Greek resistance had been quite involved. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there was the Greeks were part of the Allied forces. And so there was a Greek resistance. And the Nazis had come into this particular village and villages along the way, all the way down to the Akofto, and basically massacred all of the men and boys over the age of 13. And so I listened to some of the testimonials, and in particular, one man's testimonial. He was probably a man in his 90s, I guess, at the time when I was there in 2012. And he talked about how the Nazi soldiers would ask the boys how old they were. And because the younger boys, along with the women and the children, were placed in a school. And actually the school was later set on fire, but they were able to escape. And the older boys were sent up the hill with the men, which is where the massacre occurred. And this man was talking about how, for some reason, and he broke down at this point, he lied about his age. He didn't know what was going to happen. He had no idea. And he says this. He said, I had no idea what was going to happen. And yet I still lied about my age. And I lost all my friends. And then he breaks down, which, it really was the impetus for me to say, well, why would how do you live with something like that? How do you live with knowing that you survived when your friends didn't survive? And really, aside from a bunch of other reasons for the book, it really came from that particular testimonial.
Incredible.
Makes me emotional just thinking of
Yes,
it.
I can hear it in your voice.
Yeah, even now, so many years after the fact, it's interesting that it still bothers me to no end. I still remember that man, you know. I don't think I'll ever, as long as I live, forget him. So I thought I would read for a few minutes from one part of Nicolai's Daughters. And you can see the poster of the book behind me, but this is from Alexia's point of view. Alexia is the daughter of Nicolai, and he hasn't always been available for her. And now he's passed away, and she's in the lawyer's office to hear about his will. Alexia couldn't remember when her father's service ended or how she arrived at Stuart's office. He stood in front of the window, blocking the sun's glare. When he shifted, she was blinded by shards of light. She blinked. She wished she could see his eyes. As Stuart read Nicolai's will, he kept one hand in his pocket, flipping his change, just like always. When she was little, she thought he did that because he wanted everyone to know how rich he was. He was a tall, thin man with a high-pitched voice and one of those mouths that seemed to be frozen in a sideways grin. Even though she'd known him as long as she could remember, she could never figure out what he was thinking. He was a quiet man, not one to show his emotions. Mazda, penthouse apartment, stocks, all hers. He'd left nothing to Erica or anyone else. Erica was his love-in. She smiled, remembering Erica's words at the funeral home. We're soulmates. As if. He didn't have soulmates. He had conquests. Stuart cleared his throat. There was more. I'm listening, she said. Stuart came around the desk to stand in front of her. Alexia wondered when he'd developed all those lines near his eyes and mouth. The skin around his neck buckled and sagged. He was missing her father, too. They shouldn't have done this today. She'd insisted. She needed to close this chapter and get on with her life. They were all so damn tired. It would be good to get it over with. Stuart took off his glasses, wiped them against the front of his jacket, its metal buttons tinkling against the lenses. He put the glasses back on, looked up, and met Alexia's gaze. There's just one more thing, he said. Your father's final wish. He wants you to go to Greece. Alexia frowned. Had he known this all along? But we've buried him already, she said. He wants you to deliver a package to your sister. What are you talking about? Your sister, Theodora, you. He stared at her for a moment, then looked away, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Alexia. I thought he told you. She stood up abruptly, almost knocking into him. Excuse me? His eyes pleaded. He didn't want to die with his secret hanging over the two of you. She couldn't look at Stuart. I thought he was delirious when he talked about those things. Stuart put his arm around her. She pulled away. It can't be true. All I know is that he wants you to deliver what's in this box to your half-sister. I mean, Theodora. He walked around to the other side of the desk and sat down heavily in his chair. She stared at him in the same way she stared at her father when he used some Greek expression she didn't understand. This was hard on him, too. Was it? I think he liked secrets. She crossed her arms. He liked to play and he never minded leaving his messes for others to clean up. Alexia, you're not being fair. He never told me anything important until it was too late. She felt tears welling up. No way was she going to cry. No damn way. She swallowed hard, blinked, and focused on what Stuart had placed on his desk. And I'll finish there.
Can you tell us about some of the themes that you play with in Nicolai's Daughters?
Well, I think for me, there's themes of belonging, the difference between being raised in your own country and also versus being raised in another country as an immigrant. So there's that part. There's a lot to do with shame and the impact of a trauma in a particular generation, the impact across future generations. Which is of interest to me. Trauma like war and in particular as well, the sacrifices that a person might make in order to survive. And what does that mean to that person going down the road? Not only to that person, but also the subsequent generations of families. So I think it's those kinds of themes, and as well shame as something that I think is quite prevalent, I think, in particular in the Greek society. If you don't conform, it's probably prevalent in every society. Actually, now that I think of it, but where does it come from, and what happens when you don't conform, or when you've done something that you're not proud of? So it's those kinds of themes, but whole bag of them.
I can certainly see how those choices and that shame definitely has a ripple effect with the character, but also through the generations, like you've talked about in, maybe all your novels.
Yes, probably somehow it sneaks back in.
That's right.
I always think that, it's interesting to me that how as a writer, I personally deal with things that I'm still grappling with, still trying to understand. And so I think we do that as writers, that we're trying to come to grips with things that we couldn't solve or understand when we were, maybe younger, or when they happened, or whatever. And so it's interesting how often I think people tend to deal with recurring themes that they're still grappling with.
Yes, I remember one writer saying writing was like trying to rewrite the things you couldn't solve in real life.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of that.
Yeah, a whole lot in my case.
Well, thank you so much, Stella, for part one. And for our audience, join us in part two when we discuss and hear a reading from Stella's second novel, The Brink of Freedom. For more information or to connect with Stella about her books for school programs, book clubs, or writers interested in talking about the writing process, go to Stella's website at stellaharvey.com or on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you so much.